Wedge Issues is brought to you by wispolitics.com, a place where political insiders go for news, opinion, and campaign information. Once again, that's wispolitics.com.
When Tony Evers, a Democrat, was elected governor of the state of Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty released a statement promising that it stood ready to fight. Leading the fight for the Milwaukee-based conservative law firm and think tank is President and CEO Rick Esenberg. In a statement released after the election, Esenberg warned of an executive branch that will be, quote, hostile to the principles of individual freedom, limited government, free markets, and civil society, end quote, to which Will has dedicated itself. I'm Jessie Opoyan. I have a cold, and this is Wedge Issues, a Cap Times podcast about state government and politics in Wisconsin. Rick Esenberg joined me a few weeks before the election to talk about his organization, how it's changed over the years, and how he came to be involved in the work that he does. Stay tuned for that conversation in just a minute.
Well, I'm Rick Esenberg, and I'm the general counsel and president of the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, and I founded it in 2011. When people used to ask me what Will is, I used to tell them, well, think of the ACLU, but shift the politics just a little bit, not reverse it, because there are areas, at least until recently, where we may have had much in common with the ACLU, but our idea initially was that we were going to be a strategic litigation center that was focused on advancing the public interest in individual rights, limited government, the rule of law, and fostering a robust civil society, by which I mean private associations and institutions. Over the years, we've come to add a think tank component, largely focused on K-12 education, but not exclusively, in which we try to do policy research, which is strategic but yet serious. You know, our approach to these things is that we don't deny that we have a perspective about the way in which the world works, but we try very hard, both in our litigation and our policy work, to adhere to sort of standards of excellence and candor. And so we want people like you to come to think that, well, you know, I may not agree with what they put out, but I at least have to take it seriously, right? Because you know, they're striving to do credible work.
When you got started, I think I read an interview from 2013 that you talked about this was something that you thought that groups on the left had done well for some time, and you felt like in the legal world there wasn't really the same perspective coming from a conservative perspective. Has that changed some in the years that you guys have been active? I mean, did you sort of blaze that trail?
Well, I would say, you know, yes and no. I mean, so in my profession, and I'm trained as a lawyer and have been one now for longer than I think it could be possible. All the energy behind public interest law was generally on the left, right? And there's been a long-standing sort of left progressive legal project which has emphasized maximizing judicial discretion and using the courts to enact substantive policy changes and generally expand the reach of the federal government. Starting in the early 1980s with the founding of the Federalist Society, there's been a pushback against that, where there's now sort of this conservative libertarian legal movement which emphasizes the interpretive methods that minimize judicial discretion. You know, we talk about textualism and originalism, and which tend to see the Constitution as something which is more about limiting government, attempting to sort of structure our federal system in a way which tends to inhibit sort of concentrations of power. And so this is the Federalist Society has been very, very effective at law schools and in the legal profession, and out of that has grown sort of conservative or libertarian public interest organizations, right? Probably the most prominent one is the Institute for Justice, which I would call more of a libertarian group, tends to take cases advancing economic liberty, school choice, that type of thing. Will is sort of a state-based exemplar of that movement, right? We were going to do strategic litigation, but we were pretty much going to do it here in Wisconsin. I think there was a time when in Wisconsin on the left, there was, and I think that there still are some very, very effective organizations. What they don't have, ironically now on the left, is an organization which is just like ours.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the evolution sort of from starting as solely litigation-based and moving into this sort of think tank realm. Can you just talk about what that shift has been like, what enabled you to go down that road, and what some of the focuses have been in that think tank world?
Sure. So there was a perception, I think, on the part of some people we work with that there was a need to do sort of strategic and serious research in the K-12 area and around issues of school choice. In the area of K-12 education, there are a lot of things that people sort of accept to be true that aren't necessarily true. They have to do with how well suburban and rural schools perform. We think they perform well. They do not perform well by international standards. So that there's this idea that, if we have a problem in public education, it's simply in the city of Milwaukee. That's not true. There is this assumption that school choice does not improve outcomes for kids. I think that the answer to that is far more complicated. In fact, good choice schools, and there are many of them, significantly improve outcomes for kids, including poor kids. And so there's an assumption that if you spend more money, you will get better results. That turns out not to be the case. And so what we decided to do is we wanted to bring in people to work with us and for us who had impeccable research credentials, who could do serious work, not simply write op-eds or throw opinions around, but do stuff that sort of advances public knowledge. And again, I don't expect everybody to agree with it. No study is perfect. But we wanted to have an important voice doing serious work in the K-12 area. And so this is one of the reasons why a lot of our reports, the ones that are appropriate for it, we submit for publication in peer-reviewed academic journals. And we do that because a way to sort of demonstrate to the public, but also to remind ourselves that that's the standard of excellence that we aspire to. And as the years have gone on, we've attempted to move. We've done some work in the economic liberty area and occupational licensing, and all of that is headed up by Dr. Will Flanders, who is our research director. People often say to me, "Well, you're a lawyer. How can you do a report on school choice?" And the answer is, I don't do it. Dr. Flanders is in charge of that.
Have you seen the actual mission of what you started change over those years, or is it still sort of the core of what you hoped at the time?
So I remember at the time that we started, I had a bunch of lawsuits that I wanted to bring, and they're still in the hopper, right? Because when we started, one of the things that is important, I think, for any organization like this is that you sort of react to public events. And so when we started is right when Act 10 happened, right? When the Capitol exploded, everything looked like 1969 again, and litigation broke out all over, and there were various ways in which we were involved in that. Then the John Doe investigation happened, and given our emphasis on free speech, that was something that we got involved in. We've increasingly spent a lot of time on campus free speech matters. One of our more prominent cases was our representation of Dr. John McAdams. Well, that's not something that we necessarily planned to do. That's something that happened. And so that type of thing is always going on. But I think that, for us, and, we're focused on freedom of thought and expression, freedom of opportunity and entrepreneurship, and freedom of association in civil society. And we call that conservatism in the United States. I think in the rest of the world they call it classical liberalism. But that's what we're focused on, whether it be, as we call it, will law or will policy.
There's a lot of wonky stuff, but whenever I get a press release that you guys are, signing a brief or getting involved in a new case, I always know it's going to be something interesting, whether it's sales of butter or wolf population management or the Valentine case that you guys have taken up now.
We would try to put out a press release today, need it or not.
I guess, can you talk a little bit more about what goes into decisions on which cases interest you and which ones you think are good fits for the organization?
I mean, we generally want some larger impact. So, you mentioned the Valentine case that we just started, and that's a case that we filed in the Eastern District of Wisconsin up in Green Bay. Our client, a young woman named Polly Olson, was handing out she has this practice. She's done this every year since she can remember, in which she cuts out these sort of homemade Valentines and she writes little messages on them like God loves you and you are cared for. They generally have a religious theme. And she was trying to pass them out at her campus, and she was stopped by campus security and told that she couldn't do that. Now, for us, what's important in that case is the fact that this raises the issue of speech zones on college campuses. Right? Can a public university say that speech can only be conducted in a small area with prior approval of the administration? And we say no. We don't believe the First Amendment permits that. Mm-hmm. A lot of the attention that the case has gotten stems around, though, the very human and personal part of it. This was a young lady that simply wanted to hand out Valentines to people who wanted to take them, and somebody was foolish enough to think that they should interfere and stop that. And so, it's that part of it that's gotten the public attention, but we're also concerned about the impact that it has beyond that. And the McAdams case involved a single professor who was, fired for a blog post. But we think that the case raised important issues with respect to how you ought to interpret guarantees of academic freedom that have sort of been worked on by the American Association of University Professors over the years and have come to be adopted by colleges across the country. So we look for a larger impact. And I'm sure if you had somebody here from the ACLU or from a legal organization on the left that'd say the same thing. We can't write everything that we think is an injustice. We have limited resources, and we have to pick cases that whether we're or whether we're the ACLU or whether we're some other organization, we have to pick cases that we think will move the law and have the most significant impact.
You've mentioned the ACLU a few times, and I think years ago it could have been probably assumed that there was some overlap on maybe things like speech issues between your organizations. Do you feel like there's less of that these days?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that really surprised me, and I, one of the things, believe it or not, I read the New York Times religiously. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that shocked me in the Sunday Times, I don't know, maybe it was about a month ago, was a front page article by Adam Liptak detailing how, the left is rethinking this free speech thing. And we see a lot of evidence by that. There was sort of an infamous op-ed in the Times in 2017 that sometimes in order to, promote speech, you have to suppress speech on campus. The ACLU had a leaked memo regarding, the notion that maybe it doesn't want to protect speech that conflicts with other values that it has. So I think that movement where I think the ACLU, although to some extent I think this was always true, but the ACLU to me seems to become an organization that, to the extent that freedom can be in tension with, sort of efforts to promote government intervention to advance, some view of equality. The ACLU is more concerned about that now than it is about sort of traditional civil liberties. That might be unfair. Somebody from the organization might disagree with me, but I think that they've sort of moved in that direction, and so the area of overlap is probably less than it might otherwise be. But I think it's still there. We used to talk about it seems that, life is so tribal right now, and there's no overlap, there's no common ground for anyone. And in the legal world, I often mention the issue of criminal justice reform, where there actually is sort of this budding. They come at it for different reasons and in different ways, but there's kind of this growing agreement on the right and the left on certain aspects of criminal justice reform, and which has been, ironically, promoted and funded by the Koch Brothers more than anyone else.
Right.
And I mean, I've been at some conferences where it was this sort of odd cats and dogs lying together type of thing, where I've seen all the guys from the Heritage Foundation that I know, and they're there with these sort of radical left woke folks that are at least on some of these issues are agreeing with them.
Yeah. You brought up the Koch brothers. I think the Wisconsin stereotyped version of that is the Bradley Foundation in terms of the boogeyman. It seems to be the first attack if someone doesn't like what you guys have put out in a report or something like that. What's that relationship really like? I mean, what do you say when you are being refuted just on the basis of where your funding may come from?
Well, Mike Grebe was the past president in the Bradley Foundation, and we used to joke about this because for a while I thought that my name, I could not, I must have changed my name because every time I saw it in the paper, it wasn't, Bradley Hack became, it's Bradley Hack Esenberg, not Rick Esenberg. And we used to joke because the thing of it is that the Bradley Foundation and really all of our other funders, they don't know what we're going to do until they read about it in the paper. In Bradley in particular, I think, is, institutional funders have exercised varying degrees of supervision over their grantees, right? Some of them want periodic reports. Some of them want elaborate metrics, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, when you're engaged in philanthropy, you need to exercise, prudent control over your resources, and I think asking for accountability from people that you give money is perfectly appropriate. The Bradley Foundation is more libertarian in that regard, and I think in part keeping with their attempt to kind of be true to the disposition and the orientation of their founders. It perhaps is a little bit of an exaggeration to say that they just say go out and do good, but there's not much of one. And so we don't seek approval for anything that we do. I suppose at some point, if any funder doesn't like the things we do, they'll probably decide not to give us money anymore. But the idea that there's this sort of dark conspiracy in which people are directing other people to do things in order to advance some hidden agenda is simply not true. They have a certain view of the country and what will make the country better. Now, you may not agree with that view, but it is held sincerely and it is followed diligently. There really is not more to see than what's on the surface. I mean, they're pretty open about what they do.
What are some of your favorite cases that you guys have taken on over the years? I know you've given a couple examples of more recent things, but what stands out in terms of just stuff that you're either proud of or that you had fun with?
Well, the McAdams case was something that was very, very important to us. I am a free speech absolutist, or pretty close to a free speech absolutist, and although Marquette doesn't have to guarantee academic freedom to its faculty, as a private university, it did. I think it was correct to do so. Where it made a mistake is it didn't abide by that. And I think validating that and getting this fellow his job back was really, really important to us. Another case that I kind of like that it never got a lot of attention was sort of early on. We had a client called the Jerusalem Empowered African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was a small, predominantly African-American church on Milwaukee's northwest side, who the city of Milwaukee was sort of denying their charitable exemption for property taxes for land that they, in fact, did use for purposes of, fulfilling their mission as a church. And the reason that I think the case was important to us is because for the church, it was kind of existential. they didn't have the money to pay the property tax. If the property tax is going to be imposed on them, their church community was gone. And we took the city to court, and we were able to prevail in that case. And so, their church community continued, and it was, it didn't get a lot of attention, but it was gratifying to be able to do that.
Just, I think yesterday, you guys put something else out in terms of recommendations for wolf management. I guess environmental issues, I mean, you're involved in some, but this has seemed a little unexpected for me to see you guys weighing in on the wolf debate. So where does that fall into the philosophy?
Right. It's not so much the environmental stuff, but it's the whole question of federalism.
Right.
So, we started a Center for Competitive Federalism a couple of years ago, and there's a couple of things that I always say about that. We are in favor of competitive federalism. That is not the same as states' rights. In fact, I've told my people that I ban the use of the word states' rights in referring to our federalism project. And it's not just because the word came to have, really awful connotations because of its abuse during the Jim Crow era, but because it's not accurate. Our system of competitive federalism in the United States recognizes the sovereignty of the states. It recognizes that the federal government is one of limited and enumerated powers. But where the federal government has authority, it does override the prerogatives of the states. And so the privileges and immunities and the freedoms of citizens of the United States do bind state government. But in areas where Congress ought not to be acting, our system of competitive federalism, I think, requires that Congress step back. Now, the wolf management issue, I think, has been significant because we don't think about it in Milwaukee, and we don't think about it in Madison. We don't have wolves, although we have this lion in Milwaukee. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I've heard, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that guy still on the loose?
Well, he was spotted a quarter mile from my house.
Oh, man.
I think he still is. And at first I dismissed it, but then they got him on video. And he's like really a mountain lion.
Just bizarre.
But wolves are a big problem in northern Wisconsin,
Mm-hmm.
and they're costing taxpayers money because under state law, if your property is destroyed by a wolf, you get to apply for compensation. It's not really very adequate or very good. People are losing their livestock, people are losing their dogs. Yet Wisconsin is forbidden from having its own policy choice here because of very recalcitrant ways of interpreting the Endangered Species Act and basically sort of treating it as a one-way ratchet in which you get a species on the list, but you can't take them off, even if they've now begun to prosper to the extent that they're becoming a threat to livestock and to domestic animals. And so that's really what motivated what we were doing there.
Wedge Issues is sponsored by wispolitics.com. You can become a wispolitics.com member. Find out more at wispolitics.com/membership.
Can you tell me a little bit about your own background before Will? What got you interested in law? What has shaped your philosophy in terms of being a conservative and believing in federalism and libertarianism? Just what makes you the person doing the job that you're doing now?
Well, I was a nerdy little kid and, became interested in becoming a lawyer. I'm from a blue-collar background. My dad's a retired firefighter. I grew up in Greenfields, blue-collar suburb, and didn't know anybody who had gone to college, but I sort of thought that being a lawyer was a neat thing to do. I remember there were a lot of lawyer shows on TV back then. I'm a little too young to really remember Perry Mason, but I remember a show called Judd for the Defense, and I thought, wow, that's a great thing to do. And so I became a lawyer, came back to Milwaukee, and I wanted to come back to Wisconsin, and spend a number of years as a litigation associate and partner at Foley & Lardner, a big firm in downtown Milwaukee. I got hired away to become general counsel for one of my clients, a wonderful company called Right Height Holding Corporation. makes sort of typical Milwaukee big heavy metal iron stuff that is sold, and actually fabric too, that's sold at essentially in distribution centers. And then, I had what I call my midlife crisis, which for me seemed to consist of a recognition that I was being overpaid and underworked. And so, that's not quite right. I mean, I don't, I worked hard, but
right.
But I wanted to do some other things. And initially what I did was become a law professor. I was fortunate enough to be able to do that for a few years at Marquette University Law School. And then we decided to start Will about 7 years ago. And it's been really gratifying. I always say that I've reached the point in life where a good part of my job is to take credit for the work that other people do, and my colleagues exhaust me. It's a wonderful, core of very talented, much younger people for the most part, and it's it's been sort of great to see the organization grow and to know that it's going to be there for a long time, I think.
I was recently listening to the New York Times Daily podcast, and they did a whole episode on how the Federalist Society has shaped the judicial landscape over the last 30 years or so. Was that, when you were in law school, was that a presence on campuses?
No. The Federalist Society was not formed until the year after I graduated from law school. So, I was at Harvard Law School from 1978 to 1981. It was fairly undiverse with respect to, the different views that people would take of the law. The Federalist Society, I think, was an attempt to push back against that. And the thing about the Federalist Society is there's this tendency of people to think that this is somehow the opus dei of the legal profession. And now, putting aside the fact that opus dei isn't even the opus dei that is portrayed in sort of common literature, Dan Brown has everything wrong. The Federalist Society is really more or less a debating society. It has its National Lawyers Convention in Washington, D.C. Every November. It is widely known as the Nerd Prom. It has a big black tie dinner. And typically, a typical Federalist Society event will consist of a panel which consists of, to be sure, probably a majority of people who take a more conservative view of whatever legal issue is being discussed. But very often, there will be somebody on the left. And the Federalist Society actually promotes that. They will ask you when you're going to do an event under Federalist Society auspices, is this going to be a debate? Could you get somebody to give the other side? And I think that's a great thing. I was just speaking the other day with a lawyer here in Madison who is with the American Constitution Society, which is sort of the counterpart of the Federalist Society on the left. And, they're doing the same thing, right? They wanted to have a joint event where I would be there and I would present the conservative point of view, and they're going to have somebody on the other side who's going to tell me why I'm wrong. And that's a good thing to do. And that really has been the way that the Federalist Society has been successful. It's put forward ideas which I think when I went to law school were sort of regarded as dead, and that nobody talked about anymore. Originalism was an idea that everybody scoffed at, 35 years ago. Now we have Justice Elena Kagan saying, in some sense, we're all originalists. Natural law theory was dead 35 years ago, and it's come back now. And so, the Federalist Society, I think, has been about sort of getting certain ideas a hearing that they weren't given in the past, and they've been very, very effective. And in the course of that, they've identified and cultivated a number of very talented, very well-credentialed people who are now sort of being advanced into the judiciary. And one of the things that we could, I suppose we're not going to talk about Donald Trump. I hope not anyway.
I did have a question or two.
Well, that's fine.
But it's in this realm. It's in this question.
Right. But one of the things that the Trump administration has done is that it's essentially outsourced judicial selection to the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society. And with a few exceptions, the people that have been advanced to the federal bench, to be sure, they're far more conservative than the people that would have been appointed and were appointed during the Obama administration. But they are very well credentialed, very, very sharp lawyers, very good at what they do. And that's something that, that just doesn't happen, right? You need you need an intellectual movement to do that. You need a place where people can interact with other people, and the Federalist Society has provided that.
The Trump question is
okay. You can ask whatever you want.
Sure.
It's all right.
Well, I know for many conservatives and Republicans, Donald Trump gave a lot of heartburn during the campaign and probably still continues to do so. But one really redeeming factor for a lot of people is the importance of judicial vacancies and the responsibility of filling them. You sort of indicated this, but do you feel like he has been doing what you hoped he would do in that regard?
Yeah. I mean, he's basically, look, I think it's why he won. I think if he doesn't come out with the list of Supreme Court nominees, he would not have been able to hold enough traditional Republicans and movement conservatives to win in the way that he did. And so I think he's been smart enough to recognize that that's a commitment that he needs to stick to. And there's a certain irony in it, in that the issues that are raised by these judicial appointments, right, and what these judges will do and what they think are important are not really issues that Donald Trump ran on. They're not issues that he's shown a great deal of interest in, and were not issues that motivated his primary base. I think they were motivated by some different things. And so, but the judicial nominations have been have been very, very good. Mike Brennan, who was nominated to Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, I've known for a long time. I can't think of anybody who's more qualified to be a judge than Mike Brennan. Neil Gorsuch, fantastic. We're now in the midst of, as we record this, we're sort of in the midst of the Kavanaugh controversy. But as a judge, very accomplished individual. You,
like many other conservatives and Republicans, are not jumping at the chance to talk about Donald Trump usually, but what do you think his election 2 years in? What's the impact on both conservative and Republican politics, but sort of the public discourse at this point?
Well, look, I was, first of all, I should say that now you're asking for my personal opinion,
yes,
because the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty does not take position on candidates.
That's right.
And I was critical of Trump for a lot of reasons. I didn't and I don't like his tone. I don't like the way that he's careless about the things he says. And I have been concerned that the Trump phenomenon represents a sort of an underlying split in the conservative movement, because I think in many ways, not in the general, maybe not in the general election, and certainly not in the way that he's governed for the most part, that if we think of American conservatism, and one of the things that I always say is conservatism is different in every country because every country has different things to be conserved. In the United States, I think I mentioned earlier that what we call conservatism is generally would be called classical liberalism or just liberalism in the rest of the world, because that is one of the ways in which America is exceptional not necessarily meaning superior, but meaning different. So if you see American conservatism as sort of, the free marketeers, the social conservatives, and the foreign policy hawks, there was a sense in which the Trump campaign ran against all three of them. Mm-hmm. And really sort of introduced a fourth stool. Now, I think if you look at the Trump administration as the way it's played itself out, he's more or less governed as a traditional conservative because he's brought into the government a lot of people that would have been there no matter what Republican got elected. Mm-hmm. People like Betsy DeVos, some of his foreign policy team. The big exceptions are trade and to a lesser extent immigration. But I think that because he's putting aside the tweets, which are not traditional and not, particularly conservative in my view. He's governed in a traditional conservative way. He's been able to sort of hold together the traditional Republican coalition. What I worry about sometimes is what's going to happen, when Trump is gone, because I think these divisions that surfaced in the 2016 election, both within the Republican and the Democratic Party, with the rise of Bernie Sanders and the Democratic Socialists, how is this all going to look in 2020 when we're dealing with, sort of the overpowering personalities that masked it in 2016 are gone. The Clintons are gone. At some point, Donald Trump is going to be gone just because eventually we're all gone. And what's it going to look like then?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. What do you see, whether it's cases you might want to take on or just bigger conversation pieces, as the biggest issues that you and or will be monitoring in the next year or 2 years?
I think campus free speech is going to be an issue for us. I think that federalism and administrative reform is going to be a big issue for us. Everybody joked about Nancy Pelosi during the passage of Obamacare, when she got up and said, we have to pass the bill to know what's in the bill. Now, I will concede that she misspoke and, it perhaps is a little bit unfair to take what she said literally. But to some extent, it's true, right, in Congress now. They passed these 1,200-page bills, and the notion that, all of the members understand what's in there is probably not true.
Yeah.
But the thing of it is that even after you passed the Affordable Care Act, if you had read the 1,200 pages, you still wouldn't know it was going to be in there because the law was going to be defined, and this is not limited to the Affordable Care Act, but the law was going to be defined by the actions of all sorts of administrative agencies, both in promulgating rules and directives and guidelines. And that wouldn't happen until after the law is passed. So it's not that we would find out what's in there. It's that somebody would decide what to put in there. I think that that's an unfortunate abdication of Congress's responsibility. It happens on the federal level, it happens in the state level, and it's going to be something that we're going to be litigating about. Increasingly, I think there's been a recognition, particularly given our divisive politics, that federalism may be a route to civil peace. That is, we don't have to have uniform rules about everything throughout the country. California can be California, Florida can be Florida, Texas can be Texas, and Wisconsin can be what it is. And although, as I said before, there are areas where the federal government has power and it is supreme under our Constitution, there's a lot of areas where the federal government has really taken on authority that it never was intended to have, and maybe we need to step back a little bit and allow some type of policy diversity and then teach ourselves tolerance again. So, we don't think we have to stamp out anybody that dissents from or does something differently than we want to do. I think the free speech area, the federalism, the administrative law, I think will always be focused on K-12 reform. I don't know what the political landscape in Wisconsin is going to look like, but the intractable fact remains that our schools are not as good as we think they are. Former Speaker Scott Jensen, who lives in Brookfield, always likes to tell, his neighbors in Elmbrook that, we think that the Elmbrook School District is one of the best in Wisconsin, but if we put it in Canada, it'd be average. And so right now, I think we have a debate which is far too dominated by the interests of the adults who work for the system and is sort of, as I said earlier, is sort of predicated on things that people assume to be true that aren't. But, both on our policy side and to a lesser extent on our litigation side, we'll be working on those issues.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears. What do you do when you're not thinking about the law or politics?
Well, I said before that I was kind of a nerdy guy, right? I was a nerdy little kid, and now I'm a nerdy older guy. But, I'm a crazy dog person. I have golden retrievers, and, we spend a lot of time on that. I've got 3 grandsons, and we spend a lot of time I don't know if we spend a lot of time, but maybe we spend more time worrying about them than we spend anything else. And not really, they're great kids. So that's really important. And I think increasingly as I get older, I'm far more interested in exploring sort of areas of interest where we don't have to be at loggerheads with each other all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think, particularly when you do this type of work, occasionally you just need a break, and you need to tell yourself, okay, I'm not going to fight with anybody tonight. I'm going to watch a movie or read Shakespeare, or I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to,
Yeah.
And so, it's important to do that type of thing from time to time.
Okay. I'm going to try to put you on the spot and ask you something you think people might be surprised to learn about you. Or are you an open book?
Surprised to learn about me. It does kind of put me on the spot. I was going to say that I spent a lot of time covered in dog hair, but I don't think that's that's necessarily what you want to hear. I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe I am a little bit of an open book, but that may depend upon how I think other people perceive me.
Sure.
I guess maybe the thing that would surprise people is, and maybe more people in sort of the Madison crowd, is that one might find that I probably like a lot of the same stuff that they like. Like, I'm a huge fan of the blues, and I'm not a person that allows my politics to define what entertainment I enjoy. Mm-hmm. For example, and maybe this is not, I happen to believe that all of life's big questions are answered by The Big Lebowski.
Oh, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. You can always go back to that movie and find something relevant.
Right.
That's good. Yeah. We did a Cap Times talk with Keith Gilkes and Tanya Bjork, and someone came up to Keith Gilkes afterward and asked him if he liked the Beatles, and his mind was just blown when he found out that Republicans liked the Beatles. So
now you're asking one of the compelling questions of my generation. Are you a Beatles person or you are a Stones person?
Sure. Okay.
I am a Stones person.
Interesting.
This does not mean I don't like the Beatles.
Okay.
But I definitely was always a Stones person.
So 2 questions. One, because I am not of your generation, I believe that one can like both equally, but I think you're going to tell me I'm wrong about that. So
no, you could.
Why does there have to be a choice?
Boom.
and why is it the Stones?
Well, because the Stones are harder edged.
Sure.
And I liked that. It's funny because both of them have these sort of various iterations, right? The Beatles go from sort of being this sort of pop phenomenon to being sort of this more trippy. I think the Beatles were more at heart kind of an English show band, not so much a rock and roll band. I think that when I was, here's another thing that people wouldn't know about me. I used to be a Democrat, right? I mean, I was kind of a liberal kid. In fact, even as an adult, I was chairman of the North Shore Democrats in Milwaukee for a while.
Really?
Yeah, and so I had this sort of rebellious streak and sort of anti-authoritarian streak. And I thought that the Stones expressed that more than the Beatles, who seemed to be sort of softer and less threatening. And now some people would say, well, now you've changed because you've become this conservative. But see, I don't see it that way, because I think one of the reasons that I'm a conservative is that I'm very distrustful of the notion that some centralized authority can know how to run other people's lives. And so I think the progressive project in America has been about the idea that, well, if we just give government a bunch of power and we let experts take over, that somehow they're going to make the world a better place. Well, I don't think that's true. I don't think that anybody can have enough information. And so I believe markets and emergent order work a lot better than centralized top-down planning. Now, I do think, as you get older, you tend to have more appreciation for traditional values and things that you thought were kind of stupid when you were young. But I think I still have that anti-authoritarian streak. And, of course, my wife would tell you that what that really means is I don't like anybody telling me what to do.
Yeah. Well, there's got to be a little bit of that in everybody, right? Just varying degrees.
Certainly.
Well, I think we've run the gamut on this. This was fun. Thanks for doing it.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Wedge Issues. Our theme music is Oh Wisconsin by Loxley. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving and had some time to spend with friends, family, and loved ones. Wedge Issues is taking a break next week and probably for the next few weeks because the holidays are coming and some of us need a vacation. But don't you fret, we will be back in a few weeks, and the best way to find out when we return is to make sure you're subscribed on iTunes or anywhere else you find your podcasts. If you have any feedback or suggestions for me in the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at JessieOpie, JessieOpie, or you can email me at JOPOIEN@madison.com. I want to hear from you to find out what you hope to hear from us in the coming weeks and months as we keep this podcast up. We'll be back again in a few weeks. We'll see you then.
Wedge Issues has been brought to you by wispolitics.com. There are plenty of benefits to becoming a member. You can go to wispolitics.com/membership to find out more.